Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Secret Sunday session. Today, I'm joined by Emily Sanders, all the way from America, and she's a psychotherapist working in this space, really helping people overcome whatever it is that they are challenged with at the moment. But today, specifically, we're going to be talking about boundaries and how we can implement that in our lives, because it is a bit of a struggle. I know even myself, I can find it quite challenging, great at implementing them, but actually being able to communicate what they are with others can be a challenge. I firstly want to welcome Emily. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on today.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
No, of course. And I mean, I've done my research and I understand a little bit about you and what you do. But for those people that are not aware, who is Emily Sanders and what does she do?
Well, I am Emily, and like you said, I'm a therapist. I mean, I'd like to think I'm more things than that. I'm a wife and a mom of 3 children. But yes, I'm a therapist, and I love what I do so much. It's a joy for me to get to meet so many wonderful people, and I focus a lot on attachment wounds, anxiety, depression, certain things like that. I have a whole mix of people, from those who are really needing to manage their mental illness to people that are just wanting to be more mindful and intentional with their life, kind of make sense of what they've been through and where they're going. So boundaries, though, however, is a relevant conversation to every single human, regardless of what they're coming in to work on. So it's a conversation that will never not be relevant.
Oh, absolutely. And we look at the world that we're living in today, where there is so much, I think, alternate pressures put on a lot of people, especially with social media and also workplaces becoming quite different environments where it is quite flexible and not knowing your place and working from home. All these new concepts that are brought in that can be quite confusing for someone to understand and navigate what they actually want. Are you finding in your practice that with all of this going on, people are generally just confused with finding their purpose and what they actually want to do?
Sure. In general, I mean, there are some lucky humans that feel driven and know where they're going. I mean, those humans do exist, but they're more an anomaly. I mean, if you even think about like life, late 1800s, early 1900s, there weren't a lot of options, right? You got to make sure you feed your family, you focus, you keep your head down, you do your work. And I mean, we live in a beautiful time period, I think, but there's so many options, so many paths to take. And sometimes it's easier to pick when you go to an ice cream store, right? If they just say, hey, do you want vanilla or chocolate or swirl? That's so much easier to say versus going to a gelato place and there's 40 flavors. It's overwhelming.
Yeah, it absolutely is. I even know ice cream is a perfect example, because I'll walk into a store and I'll know my general flavors, the ones that I generally go to every time, but then they chuck in different mixes and different flavors that you like, and then you're there for an hour before you even decide. You're just testing the whole time.
Yes, testing the whole time. I think what's tough too is, in general, we tell young people, high school students, we start prepping them for college now in junior high, and that they start putting all this pressure as if they're supposed to know what they want to do with their life. And I work with so many 20-somethings that are graduating and feel more lost than ever. So I think even the way that we talk about what life and living looks like is really misguided, as if there is some finite answer, when typically we move through life and we gather little bits as we go along. We find something new that sparks our interest. We make a new connection. We uncover something different about ourselves. And we have to be flexible as we move through life. And we paint really rigid pictures, and so it's incredibly stressful.
Oh, it definitely is. I mean, and then that comes to the term boundaries. We hear it thrown around a lot, but what actually are boundaries?
We're talking about our boundaries. We're really talking about our limitations and the things that we need. And so what are we capable of? What do we need in order to operate? What helps us to feel safe? What feels like too much for us, right? And so it really comes down to, what am I needing and what are my limitations? And I think that sometimes when we're talking about boundaries, the conversation can drift into, how do we make people do what we want them to do, I feel like it can get a little bit perverted. And our boundaries are not about making other people bend to our needs as much as it is us understanding personally what is acceptable and doable for us. And we can share that with other people, and they can choose to give and take along with us or not. But they're not meant to manipulate others. It truly is about what our personal, again, needs and limitations are.
Do people often set boundaries that are based on what other people think of them or think they should be doing?
There's a lot of shoulds in life. I mean, this is very much true, right? And that's where a lot of people end up just throwing boundaries out. Because if we are focusing so much on what are the rules and expectations that have been set for us by our family or our, our religious organizations or our workplaces, then what we need and what we're hoping for, what works for us, that goes out the window and it becomes secondary. And so it's hard when sometimes there's this clashing of this is what other people want from me and this is what I want for myself, I think. And when those two rub, it is hard. I mean, that's probably some of the hardest pieces of being in relationships.
I mean, and you look at that, and there are some workplaces, say, for example, a boundary is that you know within yourself that you can only work so many hours a week, and that is your boundary. Beyond that, that is where you go into poor mental health and things like that. How is that achievable in a workplace that, say, where you have to work full-time to earn money, or your work requires you to work full-time? How do you set that boundary?
Well, it can be really challenging, and boundaries can come in all kinds of forms, especially when it comes to the workplace, right? So if when you are hired, they say your work week, we expect 40 hours, and you say, okay, you said yes to your workplace, right? And they are setting their boundaries, and your workplace is allowed to say what they need from their employee too. And it may not always align, right? But for people who are trying to be better about their workplace boundaries, they can say something like, hey, just so you know, I have a hard stop at 5:30 p.m. And if there's any work that trails over, anything you need to notify me of, please shoot me an email. And I will check my email first thing when I get back into the office. And so there are ways of you saying, I've drawn a hard line. Hey, I'm checking out at 5:30, but if you have an important message for me, it does matter. And this is how you can reach me. And this is when you can expect to hear back. So I think sometimes also what people get wrong when they're talking about boundaries, they just say no. And unfortunately, that's not how relationships work. We have to give back a little bit too, and also help people know what they can expect from us.
That can be quite scary sometimes as well, not knowing how that person is going to receive that.
Yes.
How can you set standards, or not even standards, but have that relationship with someone where they actually respect your boundaries?
Well, it is helpful if as you're walking along a relationship that you are having a lot of conversations. And of course, this can be professionally, this can be romantically, this can be platonically with friends, but your needs and your limitations and showing up for people when you say this is all baked into the relationship, right? And so nobody is going to get to know you and all of you right off the bat. These are things that are shared and given over time. Some boundaries we know personally, we've already worked on them. We know there's a hard line here. I already know what I'm going to need. Some boundaries we don't realize we need until the need actually arises. Sometimes, again, there are things that are set in place, but there are some friendships we didn't realize, oh, I actually have to, express that them calling me at 11 p.m., like I'm already asleep. And so we just may say, hey, I saw you call last night at 11. I turn off my phone by 9, just a heads up. Simple as that. Doesn't have to become a thing, right? But we're just sharing what they can expect from us. The bad news is we have zero power in making people respect our boundaries. None. This is the ugly part of the conversation, friends. None power.
Yeah, you definitely can't control how people react and respond in those situations at all.
No, unfortunately, we can't. So when we have people that respond unfavorably, then we have another set of decisions to make, right? And that can mean, well, I need to make sure, was I clear? What used to be just a gentle line now needs to be a little more firm. If this isn't working for me, then I have to determine, is this something that comes to its conclusion? So it would be wonderful if we could just say our needs and people would meet them, and then we wouldn't have to have any conflict. That'd be so great.
Well, that's what I feel like a lot of us try to do, is that, you know, we might get to that step where we set that boundary and we try to be as clear as possible. And sometimes the message isn't received as well as we'd like. And then we pull back. And then we go, all right, well, I'm now willing to sacrifice myself and my time and my boundaries because I'm a people pleaser and I want people to like me and I don't want to lose that connection. How do people take that next step and really honor themselves and what they're feeling and their boundaries?
Well, that certainly depends on the situation, what that's going to look like, right? And there's so many factors that are at play. We are factoring in, again, what our personal needs are. We are factoring in what the other person also needs, how important this issue is for us. Right. So what those conversations are going to look like with a spouse may vary from what it looks like at a volunteer organization that you give, you know, some of your time to, your business place. So if you want to throw an example at me, I'd be happy to answer.
Oh, let me think of one. All right, let's go relationships. So if you're communicating with someone that, say, for example, your boundary, actually, that's probably a bad example. Let's go workplace. That's always my go-to. I'm like, I feel like I'm working all the time, so I know these ones. So when it comes to the workplace, and say that you've set a boundary for I clock off at 5:30, but that is not clearly portrayed to your boss, where they might be calling you after those hours, and you feel really obliged in the workplace to, I have to keep my job. I have to have the secure income. I want to be liked, and maybe I want a promotion. Yet that message didn't get across as clear. And of course, they are higher up than you, so they have the power to potentially sack you. So you then give in to that. You end up working beyond 5:30 because you feel like that relationship is probably now a bit rocky, because previously you said, all right, I clock off at 5:30, and they haven't respected that. So now it's like you feel like they're digging at you a little bit.
Oh, sure.
So you work for longer and longer. And then that doesn't just happen for one day. That continues to happen. And you let that slide, all because you're wanting them to like you and you're wanting to build a stronger connection with that relationship, so that potentially underneath all that, you just want to keep your job.
Well, I mean, with workplace stuff, it is very tricky because there is a power dynamic, like you were saying. And so there are some people who have a fair amount of confidence. They operate in a position that they know they have some leverage because the company per se really needs them. And they know that they can throw their weight around a little more than somebody who is, let's say, very much an underling, right? And maybe they have a newborn at home that now they have the pressure feeding another little mouth, right? So workplace, unfortunately, is rife with a lot of abusive behavior because there is such a need, right? I have to provide for myself. And so there are a lot of people who end up being taken advantage of. And that's not to say that they're powerless. But if we were to walk it back and you told your boss, just want to let you know at 5:30, I do clock out, and they continue to call, you can come the next day and say, oh, Bob, hey, I saw that you call me. Just want to make sure that you remember, you know, that I'm not ignoring you. I just turn off my work phone at 5:30. What do you need from me? And so you're still making yourself available, right? But the onus really is on you. If you have said, this is how I stop, this is where I stop, then you have to be good on your own word, because boundaries only work when there's follow through, right? And so we can say anything, but if we are not willing to shoulder the uncomfortable feelings with really staying true with our word and what we've said we can do and what you can expect of me, then I mean your word's kind of crap at that point. So, for people that have a hard time holding their boundaries, there is some work to be done. What is the fear there? Talk about the people pleasing, or talk about what the home dynamics were. Boundaries start in our homes when we're little. So what that looks like. So there's always a lot of work to be done. It's one thing to say, hey, this is what boundaries look like. This is what they sound like. This is how you say to do them, right? I think a lot of us know in our brains what it's supposed to look like. But really, when we start to feel insecure, it's our emotional selves that lock up or bend too easily.
And you mentioned there that, sorry to interrupt you, continue. No, I was going to say, you mentioned there that childhoods and how you were brought up can really affect your personality traits and your boundaries and your relationships with other people. How, and what are some examples that can really negatively affect your experience as you get older and your traits?
Oh, sure. I mean, it can be anything as simple as, a parent barging into their child's bedroom without knocking. Children are still people, and they still do need to be respected. Their privacy is so important. So it can be something as small as that. We can have a parent who is going through something incredibly heavy, and rather than the parent going and talking to, their spouse or to a therapist or to an age-appropriate friend, they end up venting to their child. I'm just so worried we're not going to have enough money, and your dad is making me angry, and so on and so forth. And so now you have this little kid that's being overwhelmed with information that isn't appropriate for them. And also they are so worried about their parents. So they sit there in a space that's uncomfy, right? And they learn, well, it's uncomfy, but this is what's needed of me. And so we can have dynamics like that take place too. You can see what's modeled even between, a child's parents. If we have like abusive behavior that's going on, and and I don't mean this at all in a victim blame, but if they keep seeing the parent being hurt and brutalized, and the parent never steps away, you see it being very normal or commonplace to be hurt and stay put. So any number of things can be modeled or experienced in the home.
It sounds so fascinating to me that something that can be so detrimental at such a young age, kids can be so influenced, and that carries with them all the way up through their adolescence to then being an adult and interacting with other people. Get it started from, that simple one moment, as simple as, a parent just barging in the door, like how that ripple effects into the older ages.
Yeah. I mean, our childhoods are really important, and it's our first experience of the world, those core relationships. And so there's a lot to be learned from there. So a lot of times people want to do some type of coaching, right? Tell me exactly what to do. How do I set the boundary? But then they find themselves really struggling to do it, or to hold tight, or they're too firm with their boundaries. And so that's why it is worth doing the work of just being curious. Well, golly, why is it hard for me? That's where the magic happens. Because if we can figure out why we feel we need to protect ourselves from whatever X may be, then we can make new changes going forward. So
I feel that can be quite terrifying for a lot of people as well. The thought of being curious and really diving into the whys and why you act a certain way, and going into your mind and trying to understand why you do the things that you do. What are some tips that you could offer to someone that is wanting to be curious, but is so scared to take those steps of sometimes just sitting in silence and asking those simple questions of why do I do the things that I do?
Well, a lot of people get really stuck too, right? Like, in all fairness. So I just have to validate, it is really scary to be curious. I mean, we all have nicks and bruises from our upbringing. None of us walk away unscathed, even if we have the loveliest parents. It's just inevitable, right? So we have aches and pains that range from minor to really, really big. And it can be scary to revisit some of that. Some people have big, empty, gaping patches in their memory. They're like, I don't even remember a whole lot. So what am I supposed to dig through? That happens too. So just to really validate, yeah, I know sometimes it's really scary to go backwards. And what are you going to find? A lot of people carry so much shame, or they fear what was their part in it, and they just can't bear the weight of that. So yes, it's tough. Also, this, I think, is where a therapist is really helpful, and we don't all have the luxury to go to therapy. I get that. But to have somebody from the outside helping to present and provoke questions that are tailored to you too. But, there's a lot of great books that can help facilitate you doing some personal digging. I think being open to friends and their feedback, and even work reviews are great. I know that it's painful to sit down with an employer and hear the feedback they have from you, but feedback is a gift. So, I think, and for people too, a lot of people have a hard time sitting and being still. It's okay to go for a walk and let your mind wander. You can let your mind wander and allow memories to pop back up, and just let the little feelings pop back up too. I know it feels scary, but in general, it's just like allowing yourself to be more open.
Yeah, I completely
internally.
Agree. Yeah, we've got to let go, let it all come in and just experience it all.
Yeah, which can be hard, for some people that have a lot of trauma. I think it's really important to pace yourself too.
Yeah,
so
and
there
that's why,
can.
Yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree with then having a therapist to create that safe space for you if you have the opportunity to do that.
Yes. So, I mean, in the perfect world, we'd all be hooked up with fantastic therapists. But
absolutely.
But not everybody's going to get that option, and that's okay. There are so many resources now. And side note, group therapy is great for people who want to be curious about themselves and need a cheaper option. So yeah, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. And I know we've continued to, the word connection keeps popping up, I feel. And I also believe it is such a need in the era that we're living in today. Why do you believe it is so necessary for people to be connected to people, to be connected to self? Why do we need that direct connection?
It's just straight up how we are wired. We are such communal people. And there's a lot of joy that we can get in our solitude and being alone and having space for our thoughts and to connect to ourselves. That's really important. But relationships is where the magic happens in a lot of ways too. And ironically, a lot of us can feel quite healed when we're alone. and have this beautiful fantasy of how we're going to show up in relationships. But really being in relationship is where our shit is exposed. Being close and vulnerable with people exposes the parts of us that need to be healed. And the way that our partner pulls pieces out of us, the way that our children pull pieces out of us. I mean, that's where our growth is really challenged and practiced and refined in our relationships.
I keep saying this is terrifying, this is scary and all these things, but it is that sounds quite scary for someone that but when they're in a relationship, how that part of them is exposed, and most of the time they can't control that. Do you think that's why a lot of people run away from connection?
It does feel really scary. And this truly is, if we were going to tie in the conversation about boundaries, is why understanding our needs and our limitations is so important, so that we can help create connection that feels satisfying and reciprocal. And just, it popped into my brain, how you were asking why our relationship's so important. Even if we go backwards to being a baby and a toddler, right? Our self-esteem and our image is formed so heavily by our parents. They are the first person to hold us and pick us up when we cry. And if we make a silly face, that they make the silly face back, right? And we learn that, hey, I have a need and I am valuable enough for my mother to come and to meet me in that space, right? It teaches us that we're lovable. And so really, I understand that self-love is great and rah, 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 and it has to come from within. But I do think we have to honor that self-love is not just, it's not something that's innate, right? It's cultivated in those primary relationships. And so there's a lot of wounding that happens in that relationship. And as we age, maybe there are many things we couldn't get from our family of origin, and that blows. And if that's you, I wish that it was different, listeners. However, we have the power as we get older to find out in the world what maybe we didn't get at home. And so, having healing relationships, nobody can heal us, but they can create a safe space for us to heal and to do that work if we choose to. Mm-hmm. So it's honestly, it's really beautiful, mm-hmm. but it's challenging. It's not perfect. It's something that is a practice, learning to open up to people, learning who are not safe people. Oh no, you get a very thick boundary. All of that takes practice. It doesn't just flow out of us. So it is scary for those of you who are scared. You should be. That's fair. That's fair.
Yeah, there a fine line as well then, because when we look at that, people can also then just jump into relationships for the sake of feeling connected and for the sake of wanting to feel that somewhat void and connection in their life. Is that where boundaries, as you said, step in and go, all right, no, this is what I'm looking for in a relationship and this is what I need?
Sure. Again, if we're thinking our needs, our limitations, this is an ongoing development. But yes, for people who are really anxious to be in a relationship, they want to be close, they want to be loved, they want to love, they are going to be quite apt to let their boundaries just dissipate. Like, screw it. I don't care. I just want to be close. And then you have this split in humanity. You have the other people that are so terrified of what it is like to be close that their boundaries are too thick. For some of us, truly, our work is to decrease our boundaries, actually, to reevaluate them and say, hey, whoa, my walls are way too thick. Nobody can get in. And others of us need to build walls. Maybe fences is a more appropriate term. We need fences, right?
Flexibility. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So,
wow, it is something that I feel is really entrenched in a lot of our lifestyles that even I know at my age when, say, for example, we go out or, a group of girls of us go out and it's this innate culture almost that we've got to go out and we've got to find someone, or we've got to go out and we've, the mentality of like hooking up with someone, but there's no real, it's like surface level connection. Yeah. And that's where I feel another struggle on top of that, because I'm finding in our culture, at least just what I can go off my experience, it is this very much, I don't want to go deep with someone. I don't want to deeply connect with someone, but I want to get all the endorphins and all the feelings of being in a relationship and having a connection, but I'll pull back when it gets too hard.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I mean, the beginning of any relationship is pretty stimulating, isn't it? That infatuation, you're right. All the hormones rushing. It's real fun. I get that. It is fun. And we have to be careful of chasing a counterfeit intimacy. And so we can, if you're talking about like hookup culture, you can have all the sex you want, really, but we cannot confuse sex for intimacy. And so sex can enhance intimacy, and sex can also stop intimacy from happening. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's a different world, I feel. I mean, well, we can't compare. I mean, I wasn't alive in the previous centuries, but I think, being amongst this environment and learning as we go and being curious and trying to understand who we are and our place in this world can be quite challenging, but also really exciting at the same time, because you're almost discovering yourself and learning who you are and figuring out how to be strong and to respect other people and your own boundaries, which is something that I feel you're never really a teacher of. You're constantly just a student, which is kind of
Just
amazing.
learning.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's important for people too to just be cautious of being too self-focused. There's a balance to every conversation, right? Please don't forget yourself, and also please don't forget others. So while you are cultivating and refining your boundaries and practicing being flexible, be careful to make sure that you are also listening to your partner's needs and to their limitations and to your friends and things like that. So again, so many of us are typically on one side of the spectrum. It's everybody else's needs or only our needs. And so, yeah, we're
Working to find meet in the middle.
the middle ground. Yes. And a lot of times there is so much swinging, right? We tend to, oh no, this is so horrible about me. And so we make this like grand, overcorrection. And then we swung too far and then we swing a little back. And, hopefully it's why we need to have grace for ourselves.
Yeah, but I feel that's why we have quite an extensive period on this earth to be able to try and experiment and see what works for us and what doesn't, and swing back and forth and just enjoy the ride and learn as much as we can so that we can eventually become the best versions of ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I want to end with lastly, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been so educational and amazing for even myself personally, just learning a lot from yourself. But what are some final, tips and sort of advice for someone that may be struggling with boundaries in all areas of their life? And I know it's going to be different for every different area, but the relationships, the workplace, the family, the friends, and themselves, how can they really implement boundaries that are healthy for themselves and stick to it whilst remaining strong in their relationships and connections with people?
Sure. Well, there's a lot.
Yeah,
there's a lot.
When I was saying that, I'm like, oh, I should have broken that down probably a bit more.
You should have started with that, actually. No, but I think it's important for people to remember that boundaries are not just no. So we can get stuck again in being very rigid. And for many of us that are trying to be in relationships, we are compassionate, we want to be kind, boundaries are not just no. And this is, I think, where we can bring in the conversation of what compromise and real relationships look like, right? So that can be, your mother saying, hey, I want to drop by. And we can just say no. Or you can say something like, oh, Mom, now is not a great time. I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm free tomorrow, though, at 10. Does that work? So if for people who have a hard time just saying no straight up, you can offer something that does work for you. Oh, I can't do this. However, I can do this. Oh, unfortunately, this isn't going to work for me. This is what I was thinking. What does that sound like? Right? And we do this with finances. Oh, we're going to plan a party together and your girlfriend suggests a $1,000 party bus and let's split it 3 ways. And you're like, I'm trying to, watch my money. I'm on a budget. I've got $100 for this outing. Like, what can we do with that? And so again, boundaries doesn't have to just be no. It can be, oh, I'm not sure this is going to work for me. However, I can do this. I can't quite make that work. What about this time? So you can say, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work. However, I can do this. So just kind of keep that in mind, that boundaries aren't just about no. You can also talk about what will work for you.
That is phenomenal advice. Yeah. Okay. It's something like in my head, I'm taking notes going, okay, I can do this here and I can do this here.
Yeah. So
can you implement that? Sorry, but do you find that it's easy for you to implement that in your life as well? Like it works for you?
Oh, Yes, absolutely. It takes practice. Everything takes practice, but it does get easier, right? I mean, I think back to being in like my early or late 20s and just my armpits sweating, having to say no, with confrontation. And you grow into it being more comfortable, especially when you can hold in your mind, I'm doing this because I want to preserve this relationship. This thing matters to me. So I have no choice but to speak up as far as what will make this relationship function. Hey, listen, Bob, I really love this job. This company matters to me. The hours aren't working for me. If you are really needing me to stay till 6, I'm happy to do that, but I will need to come in a little bit later in the morning then to help balance that out for my family. Right. And so rather than just saying, well, screw it, I'm out, or, well, I have no option here. Our boundaries help preserve our relationships from resentment and misunderstandings. I mean, they're gold.
That's amazing. Honestly, absolutely phenomenal. And I'm so happy that you're able to implement that in your life through practice. It's something that I'm definitely still working on. I know a lot of people that follow us in this community are the same, where we know, as I said, we know how to implement them. We know what we want to follow, but it's just managing that and respecting other people's responses as well, which can sometimes be difficult. But it's a work in progress, and that's life.
It is. And, for those of you that have had frequent conversations and, people in your life who are repeatedly crossing your boundaries or dismissing your request or become really combative when you're trying to come up with a compromise, I think that that's a point of caution and to not dismiss that. Relationships are work, yes, but they should not be a slog. They should not feel like they are constantly draining. They shouldn't be just constantly anxiety provoking, feeling anxious and feeling misunderstood or feeling violated or dismissed. That's not the work we're talking about when it comes to making our relationships thrive. So our boundaries do help weed out some of the bad eggs, so to speak. So as yucky as it may be to try to work on boundaries and there's just constant friction, as sad as it may be a little bit of an indicator that maybe this relationship's not one that fits for your life. And that's painful. That's sad. Endings are hard, but it is important to pay attention to those cues too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for jumping on today and sharing a little bit about what you do, but also that phenomenal insight about boundaries, relationships, and connection. It is something that, as you said, is so necessary for us as humans to really be able to connect with one another and feel valued and loved and also just feel respected. So thank you so much for starting that conversation with me and, of course, your time. I appreciate what you're doing and how you're helping so many people. So thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Thanks for having me.
No worries. And thank you as well to everyone else out there for joining in for another Secret Sunday session. We hope you enjoyed this one. Where can everybody find you, Emily?
Oh, well, you can primarily find me on Instagram at emily.sanders.therapy. I'm also on Facebook as well, but Instagram's probably the easiest way to find me. Yeah, I also have a website, which is my name, emilyhsanders.com. So,
love it. Yeah. Amazing. Once again, thank you. And thank you to everyone else out there. And we'll see you all again in another 2 weeks.